Good evening. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. It's not the first time ever I discovered, but I'm going to call it the first time ever because we now have these 2 nighttime services, and this is the first time ever we're having live teaching in a long time. So I'm really happy to be here in the room with you and be present with you. Like Stephen said, my name is Sarah, and I get the privilege of working with Echo Compassion, which is all of our local, regional, and global outreach. So this weekend, there are a few of us here at Echo that are trying to tackle this very big question: why believe that there is a God? The process of working through this question has been really cool because we've gotten to work through it as a group and as individuals. And I've found 2 things that I think are really important. Number 1, this is a universal question. People have been asking this for centuries, and people will continue to ask this long after we're gone. But number 2, this is also a very personal question. My own journey with this question of believing in God is pretty complicated. Sometimes I've felt just naturally full of faith and I've not asked it at all. Other days I've felt like it's just as close as my next breath, and I wonder, is God really real, and can I believe in him? And I would like to admit also that there are some times that I've even been too scared to ask the question at all. So in preparation for this moment and for being with you guys here tonight, it's been really important for me to say something to you. Wherever you are in your journey of faith, we want to acknowledge that this can be a tough question. And we want to invite you to wrestle through it here with us. And I know that that is a hard thing to invite, but I want to say thank you, and it's really brave to be here. I think that the process of working through these hard questions really matters, and this is actually why we have our table groups, because we think it's great to do it here from the stage and here on Sundays, but it's really great to wrestle together in community through hard questions like this. And I want to also say from my personal experience that I've experienced these people here and God as a safe place to wrestle. So with that, let's jump in, and we're actually going to start with a different question. Why do we believe what we believe? Is it because we're told something, or is it because we experience something? Certainly it's a mixture of the 2, right? So growing up, I was a hopeless romantic. I read all of the romantic books and watched all the rom-coms, and so for me, romance looked like being in Paris. I thought that Paris was going to be the most romantic place in the world. I had an Eiffel Tower-shaped lamp on my bedside stand. I had Eiffel Tower posters and pictures and postcards, and I read all of the books about love in Paris, and I just knew that my whole life was pointing to the moment when I would be with the love of my life at the Eiffel Tower. So about 4 years ago, it was my 10th anniversary, my husband and I got the chance to go to Paris. And you bet yourself that the very first thing that I did was get online and book the earliest tickets I could get to go all the way to the top of the Eiffel Tower. I was so excited. I got the earliest ones in the day. It was, we got there at night, so the next morning we were going to get up, and that's what we were going to do. So let me tell you how that day started. So we get up, and it's raining, which could be romantic, except that my blow dryer isn't working because it's Europe, and I didn't prepare well, and I have a lot of hair, and so it's cold and rainy, and my hair is wet, and I'm cold, and I'm frustrated, but I'm sure that the Eiffel Tower is still going to cure all of this. So we get in the Uber, and we go from the Uber up to the Eiffel Tower, and again, I bought the earliest tickets possible to go up the Eiffel Tower. So I'm sure, again, we are going to be probably, the only ones there. And you know what? We weren't. And do you know what is not romantic? Hundreds of people standing with you in line for the Eiffel Tower. In fact, I have a picture. Yeah, you can look. Oh, it's right here. This is how it looked. And this was not what my romantic dreams were made of. There were crying babies, loud families, and tour guides yelling over each other in all sorts of languages. And I will tell you that my belief in the Eiffel Tower, which had stood strong for almost all of my life, was a little bit changed. I know. It's okay. I do want to tell you that Paris redeemed itself, and it was really still very lovely, and I did see the Eiffel Tower sparkle at night, which was still good. But what I believed, just because somebody had told me that the Eiffel Tower was the most romantic place in the world, was very changed when I had an experience of it. And we all have stories like this, because our beliefs, both big and small, are influenced by what we're told, by information, and by experience. So last year, there was a Gallup poll that reported that 81% of Americans believe in some kind of God, but only half of those claim to believe in the God of the Bible. So regardless of where you land in those percentages, we've all likely thought about God at some point in our lives, even if when we were kids. A few years ago, I was driving my 3 kids and one of their friends across town, and they were in the back seat, and I'm listening, and they're talking about Jesus. And they're talking about this really hefty theological question, like, when is Jesus coming back, and how is he coming back, and what will it take for him to come back? And I'm feeling here like the parent of the year. Like, my children are so wise. But very quickly, this digressed. And they went from talking about heavier theological questions to really heatedly debating whether or not God had facial hair. And it took a little bit of debate from them, and it was pretty heated, but I want to let you know that they decided that if God could, if he wanted, and they believed that he could, that he probably did have a mustache. And so I think it's really fun to look at what kids believe, right? But as we get older, our questions and our concerns become more complex and more confusing when we're thinking about God, right? More confusing than whether or not he has a mustache, even though it is a hotly debated topic. These questions can lead us to wonder whether or not God is real. They can lead us to doubt God's existence. And maybe you're here tonight and you don't even know if believing in God matters to your everyday life. So last week we started this series that we're in. We're in week 2, and it's called Explore God. There are hundreds of other churches in the Bay Area going through this series with us to discuss 7 big questions about God and faith. And like we've established, today's big question is why believe there's a God. Again, if this is your first time coming, thank you. Thank you for wrestling through with us. And I just want to ask you to listen with curiosity. And if you're here today and you do already believe in God, we want to invite you to reflect on that belief. Last week, Pastor Felipe invited us to pray this prayer, influenced by the 17th century intellectual Blaise Pascal. He challenged some of his contemporaries to wager on God by saying this: make a bet that there is a God who loves you. If you are right, you have everything to gain. And if you are wrong, you have nothing to lose. So tonight, I want to invite you right where you are to say a similar prayer quietly in your heart. It goes like this: God, if you're real, will you reveal yourself to me? But we're going to do it together. So I want to invite you, if you're comfortable, so feel free to close your eyes. Take a deep breath in and out either way. Let the early part of today go. And in your heart, ask God, if you're real, will you reveal yourself to me? This can feel like a risky prayer to pray, to ask God to show up, but it just could change your life. And I think that if God is real, he wants you to find him. But this question that we're wrestling with today is not an easy one. It is not a light one. It is a very heavy, very heatedly debated topic. The field of philosophy provides plenty of arguments for the existence of God. And some of you would love to work through each one of those arguments. And other ones of you would like to run as far away from people who want to go through those arguments. But if you are in the first camp, we do have some resources that we won't be able to get into tonight. But when you check in through our digital program, you'll have access to those. And as I said earlier, this is a safe place for you to wrestle through the hard questions. We think and know that reason and intellect are important parts of how we work out big things like this. And it's important for us not to throw those out in the name of faith. But I do hope that we can all acknowledge that we're also all human. So we have reason and intellect and emotion and intuition, and we're all very embodied, complex beings. So we might understand something like eating vegetables is good for me. Reason and logic tell us that that's true. But that doesn't mean that automatically we eat all of our vegetables, right? Or that we even want to. So what do we do when we struggle with belief? Especially not just belief in God, belief in vegetables, but belief in God. Maybe God once seemed real, and now he feels distant, and that's your struggle, and that's real. Maybe you've been hurt by someone in the church or connected to a church or who said that they believed in God, and that is very, very real as well. I totally get that experience. I grew up in a Christian environment, and I'm a really relational person, and so for me, I know what it felt like to experience somebody who said that they believed in one thing, and their actions and their lives did not connect with that belief. In high school, I was part of our Christian youth group, and I was heavily involved, so I was there all the time. And just in the span of those 4 years, I had one of our leaders have a very messy public affair, and another one of our leaders, in a horrible situation, took advantage of one of my best friends. So I know what it's like for relationships with people to be the thing that is the barrier between you and belief in God. And I know that it's a challenge, but I want to tell you that for me, in my one life so far, I have found that challenge to be worth the work and the effort and the energy. Whether you felt abandoned by God or have pushed God away or just aren't sure where you stand, I want to propose this. Whatever we do or don't believe about God will impact our life in some way. When we're not sure whether to hold to a certain belief or not, a good, helpful way forward is to think through this. Where is my belief leading me? If you are taking notes, this is a good one to write down and talk about with your table group. Because what we believe leads to certain outcomes. As we strengthen our beliefs in the importance of eating vegetables, the more that belief will cause you to eat vegetables. And we can also all agree that many of the tragedies in our world stem from misguided beliefs. It's very clear to us. And our beliefs also influence our behavior. So if we believe that we have really limited resources, we often hold tightly to what we have, right? If we believe that somebody is mad at us, either we go toward them and try to fight them, or we pull back and get away from them. On the other hand, if we believe that somebody loves and accepts us, it's much more likely that we will love and accept that person in return. A great reflection question. What does my behavior reveal about my beliefs? And more specifically, where has my belief or my disbelief in God led me? A great place to start when thinking about this is with those described in the Bible, because their stories give us a window to look back and see how their lives turned out. For those of you who aren't ready to accept what the stories in the Bible are true, that's okay. We can look at it as a literary thing tonight and just let the stories literally speak for themselves. The first person we want to observe is Abraham. So Abraham is a character who famously received a promise that he believed was from God. And so this promise was to make Abraham and his descendants into a great nation that would both bless the world and be blessed by God. All over the world, Abraham is known as the father of the Jewish faith. So in this promise, God told Abraham to leave his native country. And though he did, if you read the story, have a lot of missteps along the way, Abraham did try to follow what he believed God was telling him to do. And eventually, after a really long period of waiting, Abraham and his wife had a son named Isaac. So this seems like the fulfillment of God's promise to make him into a great nation through his descendants. Until this very same divine voice who had led Abraham on this journey called him to sacrifice his son. It's a really hard test of belief, and it's really gruesome. So I just want to give you a spoiler alert that it's okay. It all gets better. So Abraham did believe God, and he obeyed. And at the last moment, God intervened and saved Isaac. And I want to read a recap just because it's a hard story to get through. So in the book of Hebrews, the author recaps Abraham's belief. He says, by faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. We could talk about this one story all day, but it is worth noticing that Abraham not only believed God, but he believed that God was good and faithful, and that he would fulfill the promises in a good and faithful way that God had made to Abraham. And this belief in this God led him to be willing to make some pretty big sacrifices, not just his son, but the land of his home. The second one we're going to talk about today is David. He is one of my favorites. He starts out as this nobody. He's this shepherd boy, and then he turns into this hero because he's the David of David and Goliath. And then he turns into a king. He's a really complicated figure, and I think that this is why I like David so much. He experiences a wide range of emotions, and I feel like I do too. And he didn't make really good decisions all the time, and I also don't feel like I do. But David, through periods of exile, success, and failure, was led by his belief in God to honestly and vulnerably express his thoughts and feelings. And in doing so, we see him relinquish control of his own life to God. So I have many favorite writings of David. Like I said, I feel like a complicated person, and he expresses a lot, and I do too. And over centuries, millions of people have been drawn to belief in God because of David's example. And some words like these that he wrote. Let my soul be at rest again, for the Lord has been good to me. He has saved me from death, my eyes from tears, my feet from stumbling. And so I walk in the Lord's presence as I live here on the earth. This small portion of David's writings shows us his belief that everything that he faced did not diminish who God was. And in fact, it was through all of these things in which his belief in God was strengthened. So to review, Abraham's belief led him to be willing to make a lot of great sacrifices. And David's belief led him into deep, honest vulnerability and relinquishing control. Now, these outcomes can feel a little hard to stomach. They're not so pretty, especially if any of us in here have been led to believe, by popular opinion, that following God equals an easy life. I actually would prefer to stand up here and tell you that if you just believe God, that he will make you healthy, wealthy, and wise. But when I look at the people most committed to God, whether it's in the Bible, whether it's in more recent history, if you think Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Corrie ten Boom, Jim Elliot, Martin Luther King Jr., that's not what I see. When I look at the stories of those I know personally, like my grandmother who's turning 80 this week, who started out her life abandoned by both of her parents, who went on to live and have families of their own, grew up to have 3 children and only to lose her only daughter to cancer at a young age, and faced many more public and private tragedies and traumas. When I look at her and her solid belief at 80 years old that God is who he says he is and that he is good, I don't see this equation that living a life believing in God equals a life of ease. But what I do see are stories of men and women who faced incredible uncertainty and struggles, and yet somehow they continued to believe. They held fast to this belief with all that they had at some points. But despite the odds, they kept fighting to believe. So this leads us to ask, what compels them to do this? What is the benefit to believing in God? Maybe you're wondering, is there even one? So when we look at these stories, we see this theme emerge. We see the cause and effect of believing in God and holding to faith in him. And if you read more or live more, you can see the cause and effect of not believing in God. And these stories can feel really personal to us too. Even if we're separated by thousands of years, we can relate with their struggles at a human level, like the struggle to sacrifice, the struggle to leave home, the struggle to feel qualified and capable to do something God asks, and really personally, the struggle to be vulnerable and relinquish control. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but I think relinquishing control is something that we all have struggled with at one point or another. It's not easy. If we're honest, we all have unanswered questions. Things we wrestle with either quite publicly, if you look at social media, or quietly and internally and behind closed doors. In fact, the Bible reveals only one person who believed well and completely. We're not going to get into the story of Jesus tonight, but we will in a couple more weeks, so I do encourage you to stay engaged in this Explore God series. But for the rest of us who are not Jesus, the struggle to believe can be and probably is very real at different points. So how do we hold to it? How do we believe, especially if we want to believe and we don't know how? This is where faith comes in. Faith is not just a feeling. Faith is a choice. Friends, faith is not the absence of your doubt or your questions, or it doesn't come the moment you've figured everything out. But instead, faith is a decision to decide to trust in something or someone bigger than ourselves, most often in spite of our questions and our uncertainties and our doubts. This is why the writer of Hebrews says, faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Again, when I think back to those people that I know that have influenced me to keep going in my own journey of belief, it isn't just their reasoning that convinces me, and it isn't even just the outcome of their easy life, right? It's actually their enduring faith that is the evidence to me that God is present with them and worth believing. All of these people, whether it's in the Bible or throughout history, they believed in God, and somehow they saw something beyond their circumstances that was worth the perseverance that faith requires. Their faith was not perfect, nobody's is, and they did not live perfect lives. In fact, I'm really grateful for that because I think that's part of the beauty of the story, right? Not living a perfect life, but holding on to faith anyway. You see, somewhere along the way in their struggles, these people experienced the blessing of life with God, and something inside of them came alive. They determined that life with God is better than life without God. But it's important to note here, just a little asterisk, that life with God can only be done God's way. We, like these people in all of these stories, we cannot grasp for control of our own lives and hold to faith in God. Following God and believing Him will require a choice. We either hold to our own lives and our own control, or we hold to faith in God, even if it means being vulnerable, and even if it means taking sacrifices, even if it means leaving what is comfortable and familiar to you. But in addition to personal and historical stories, there are these unseen realities outside of us and inside of us. You know those moments that you can't really seem to find the words to describe? Maybe something captivated you and made your heart beat faster, or made you cry inexplicably. Sometimes these moments can only be described as divine or otherworldly. In the New Testament, in a book called Romans, the author Paul writes this: through everything God made, they, meaning people, can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature. And on that note, I want to propose that these things, these moments and elements that seem unexplainable, are intentionally placed into existence by God to point us to Him. And today we're going to refer to these things as signposts. So these are invisible qualities that point us to something bigger and outside ourselves. And there are a lot of signposts in this world that we could get into, but today we're going to focus on 3: beauty, justice, and love. Let's jump into signpost number 1, the experience of beauty. Whether it's music or poetry or art or just nature, our senses know what it's like to encounter and to take in something beautiful, right? So New Testament scholar N.T. Wright says this, and it's on the screen so you can read along. We must acknowledge that beauty, whether in the natural order or within human creation, is sometimes so powerful that it evokes our very deepest feelings of awe, wonder, gratitude, and reverence. Have you ever experienced a moment when you were struck by beauty and wonder? Maybe it's just the wind in your face or a sunset. Maybe you're walking through Yosemite Valley or Muir Woods or Sequoia National Park. We have lots of beauty here in California, just right at our fingertips. But what if this sense of awe and wonder was there in existence to point us to a divine artist, to a divine mind that has created and orchestrated a good and ordered and beautiful world? It's a fascinating question. In fact, one argument for the existence of God is that the complexity of the universe itself seems to point to the existence of a master designer. David, the guy we just talked about, wrote in the Psalms, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." David also wrote about the wonder of the human mind and the human body, which in my opinion is more wonderful and awe-inspiring than all of nature put together. I mean, have you ever seen a newborn baby? When I gave birth all 3 times, I was absolutely wonderstruck by the unique and beautiful creatures that had just been born. In fact, I brought a picture, as any proud mom does, of my most recent baby. Here she is. I know. She's still cute, but I mean, like, look at this. It's pretty awe-inspiring when we look at the human body and the complexity and intricacy of humanity. David acknowledges God's workmanship by praying this. "For you shaped me inside and out. You knitted me together in my mother's womb long before I took my first breath. I will offer you my grateful heart, for I am your unique creation, filled with wonder and awe. You have approached even the smallest details with excellence. Your works are wonderful. I carry this knowledge deep within my soul." Maybe tonight you're here just to hear that you are intentionally and wonderfully made by a God who intended for you to be here just the way you are. A reflection question to notice around this signpost. What if beauty is a signpost put into creation by God himself to draw our hearts toward him? If you're writing things down, this is one I would write down and think about later. Signpost number 2 is the longing for justice. Most of us have a deep desire within ourselves to do something about the injustices of the world, whether you believe in God or not. The prophet Isaiah was talking to the nation of Israel, and he says this: "Learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow." I'm pretty sure all of us could nod our heads. These things we all agree on. They all matter. That longing to see justice in the world is a feeling that somebody needs to do something. In fact, this is something that I process every day in my role as I lead the compassion department here. There is so much injustice in our world. Frankly, and quite personally, it can be overwhelming. Where do we even start? But the easier part of my job is that I do not have to convince any of you that it does matter that somebody needs to do something. Recently, we were having dinner with our kids. They're older now, not just babies. And we were talking about starvation, which is a fun dinner conversation. We were trying to explain to them what a bloated belly is, like on a malnourished child. Anyway, there's a long story how we got there. But it is also important to us and to our that our children will care about the injustices of those suffering in the world. Our children are very blessed with food and shelter, so we find it important to open their minds. But as we did this, as we had this conversation, we did not have to convince our kids, our little kids, that something about starvation in the world should probably be fixed. Innately, they knew it. And as we ate pasta and talked for the rest of the time, they were trying to figure out, should we do something? Should someone do something? Why isn't this fixed? Something innate in us, even from childhood, knows that justice matters. Why is it that all humans share a sense of justice? Why is it that every person on earth shares a conviction that some things just are truly wrong? Almost all of us can agree that abuse, starvation, unfair working conditions, they all are wrong and they all matter. We get it. Even those who have seared their consciences and done evil things for a really long time, they end up leading to high levels of suicide and shame and depression and early death because we have an internal sense of justice. To reflect on this, I'd like to ask this question. Could it be that our longing for justice was placed in our hearts to point us to a divine author who is himself just? Could it be that God, who is just, created us with that longing to draw us to himself, the answer to justice? And then the last signpost, number 3, our desire for love. As I said, I'm a hopeless romantic, so it's my favorite. Love is the thing that draws us out of our own bubble and existence into existence and relationship and connection with others. Even when relationships are difficult and messy, somehow we still all carry that desire to connect with somebody and to share experiences with them. This is possibly why, and probably why, social media has been so prevalent in the last couple of decades. And this is also probably why anxiety and depression have risen with social media, because we're not connecting the ways that really do help us. Can you recall a profound moment you shared with somebody, like a deep conversation over a drink, or a special moment with your family member? Can you recall a time when you even felt connected deeply to somebody just because you heard their story? You know, growing up, I was not a kids person, but I do have my own kids now, and I have three kids, 9 nieces, and 1 nephew who I call my favorite. And I will tell you, I am not a kids person, but I am those kids person. I would fight you for those children. I would do anything I could for those kids. I would sell anything I had to make sure that they had what they needed, because the love in me for them stirs me in ways that I just can't explain. Why do we all have a capacity and a need to be loved? Where does this come from? One of Jesus' followers, a disciple named John, wrote that Jesus said, "God is love." And Jesus himself demonstrated this by the way that he loved and connected with others. John, that same author, even referred to his own self as the one that Jesus loved. He was that sure. What if our desire for love points us to God, who is described as the very definition of love? You know, there's a time in my life a few years ago when my husband and I had moved from the East Coast all the way out here. And though we were really happy to be here, I felt completely rootless. We had left our really big united families, and they seemed to be doing fine without us. And then we came here to friends that had history and inside jokes that we couldn't understand, and I felt totally rootless and alone. One morning I read these words of Jesus that I had surely seen hundreds of times, but it struck me differently. He said, "There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you?" And that phrase, "more than enough room," struck me in a new way, because I wasn't sure at that moment where I fit or if anyone had space for me anymore. But I was reminded at that very moment that God's love was abundant. I desperately needed connection. And I needed that connection to be a good one that reminded me that no matter where I was geographically, no matter where I was in community, that God loved me and saw me and wanted me. And for me, this relationship with God has remained a steady constant. No matter what's going on around me, in the world, in my community, God has shown up as faithful and spacious enough to give me room to be all those things that I need to be. Often, God loves us by reaching toward and pressing into the places where we are most relationally hurt and wounded, and where we have the most relational questions. And the question for this signpost is, how might God be trying to show you love? Outside of reason or intellect or beauty or justice, we have this desire and this need for connection, especially a connection that loves us unconditionally. I don't know where you are today in your belief or in your doubt, but I do want to invite you, to beg you, to consider how might your life be impacted by a God who does love you deeply and longs to be in a connected, vulnerable, open relationship with you. We're going to sing a song in a minute as a time of reflection. And if you don't know where you stand with faith, I invite you again to repeat that same prayer that we prayed earlier. God, if you're real, would you reveal yourself to me? And if you already profess a belief in God, I want to encourage and maybe challenge you to pay attention and to reflect on your behavior and the direction of your life. How does it reflect what you believe? Is this an opportunity tonight for you to recenter your beliefs on the God of the Bible, on a good God who loves you, and maybe to let go of your tight control on the things that you want to control, and to start holding tight to a belief in the God of the Bible? Ask God to reveal himself to you in this process as well. I'm going to pray before we do this reflection. If you guys will close your eyes with me, I want to honor the vulnerability that could be happening right now. If you feel resistant, just ask God to show up. Perhaps God has been trying to show up in a signpost, in a relationship, maybe in a desire that you have for beauty or justice or love. And tonight is the night where he wants to reveal himself to you in a new way. Maybe you've been carrying wounds that he wants to reveal himself as he can heal and interact with you. Maybe your doubts are actually the place that God can start to work in your life as you're vulnerable and as you start to wrestle. God, if you're real, would you reveal yourself to us? Would you show us who you are? Thank you that you see us individually. You see us in this room. And as we reflect, would you speak to us in new ways?